Stephen Howes, thank you for your time today on Breaking Politics. Tell us, why do you think Prime Minister Rudd has decided to make a trip so soon in his new Prime Ministership to Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, I guess he did it the first time he was Prime Minister. He went to PNG not long after he was elected. And I think it's primarily part of projecting himself, as being back in charge and playing a regional, indeed a global leadership role. But there are certainly a number of issues that he'll be discussing with PNG, which are very important for him and for Australia. And at the top of that list would have to be the Manus Island Processing Centre. That's critical for any kind of regional solution, and it's it's somewhat controversial in PNG, and we still don't have a permanent processing centre. So there are a number of things to discuss about Manus. And Rudd's also indicated he wants to talk about the big LNG project and also about health and police. So it seems like it's going to be fairly wide-ranging discussions.
Now, of course, when Prime Minister Rudd announced that he was going, he didn't mention Manus Island, though he went to a couple of other areas like law and order and the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Why do you think he might have left that out of his preview for the trip? Is there little he can achieve on the topic, perhaps?
I guess on Manus, the government's on board. The opposition is opposed to it, but they're a fairly small political force. There are only 6 MPs now out of 120 actually in the opposition. But there are still issues to work on, and in particular, as I said, we still haven't gone onto a permanent site and a permanent facility at Manus. So I'm sure it will be discussed. But it's good if it's not the only topic of discussion. And there are certainly other critical topics to be discussed. And one of the risks we've seen with Manus is that it has pushed other topics out and made it difficult for Australia to speak as a close but sometimes critical friend because we need PNG on board for Manus.
OK, let's look at those couple of other issues briefly. The Sovereign Wealth Fund. What would Mr Rudd hope to achieve in a lightning trip to Port Moresby there?
Well, his trip could be quite useful, actually. PNG's been setting up a Sovereign Wealth Fund to house the proceeds of its massive LNG project. This is a huge project which is now mainly being constructed. It's going to start coming on stream next year, and by 2015 it's going to be delivering almost $1 billion of revenue a year. So PNG's agreed to set up a sovereign wealth fund to house the proceeds of that big resource project and spread, so that it can spread the expenditure out over time, which is a good idea. And Australia has been very strongly helping PNG do that, and good progress was made. Last year the legislation was passed, but the progress seems to have stalled pretty much completely this year. And the government said it wants to amend the legislation. It's reported there's a cabinet decision actually to completely change the nature of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, to give the proceeds from the fund to state-owned enterprises. But they traditionally have been loss-making, and very inefficient. So that would be pretty worrying. So Australia has really put a lot of capital into the Sovereign Wealth Fund and, has been quite proud of the role it's played. That's certainly under threat. And, Rudd really needs to have a very frank conversation with Prime Minister O'Neill to find out whether O'Neill is still interested in setting up a Sovereign Wealth Fund. And, if so, perhaps, set up some benchmarks so that we can accelerate progress. Because at this rate, the LNG project is going to be alive and delivering revenue before the Sovereign Wealth Fund is set up.
OK, and Mr Rudd also chose to mention law and order in Papua New Guinea as a worry, which is a quite extraordinary thing, it seemed to me, for a foreign leader to be mentioning as a topic for a visit to Papua New Guinea. How did it strike you?
Well, again, it's something Australia's been involved with, and we do have, $500 million aid program, which pretty much touches on all corners of PNG life. including law and justice. So I think it's a legitimate interest, but the problem is biting off more than you can chew. And what I'd suggest is that on the last visit from Rudd as Prime Minister, which was 2008, he set up with then Prime Minister Sir Michael Somare the Ross Garnaut-Namilau Commission on Tertiary Education. That report has, came in a couple of years ago. There's some implementation, but PNG's universities are in a crisis situation. Given that's something that Rudd personally was involved in back in 2008, I think it'd be very good if he focused on that initiative and on its implementation. As
opposed to spending too much time on law and order?
Well, as you mentioned, there are a range of issues. These are all very difficult problems. They're ones that are not going to be solved overnight. And I just think there's some case to be made that if he's already made an investment in tertiary education, he commissioned with the PNG government this useful report. Now he's Prime Minister again. It would be legitimate for him and useful for the relationship to inquire about implementation of that report and again, whether it can be accelerated.
To close, Stephen Howes, obviously of the issues confronting Papua New Guinea, the asylum issue and Manus Island is the one that Kevin Rudd has most electoral interest in from his own point of view back here in Australia. Is there anything he can come back with from Papua New Guinea that would strengthen his hand in the asylum debate, or is it pretty well a no-win for him in terms of the politics here?
Yeah, I'm more of an economist than a political scientist. I guess if he can announce some agreement or some acceleration of the permanent facility, that might help. But my concern is more on the other side, to be honest, that the risk in the last year or so has been that Australia has not been prepared to say anything critical to PNG because we're so worried about Manus. And I think the real test for this visit will be whether Rudd can follow through on some difficult issues, whether it's the Sovereign Wealth Fund or tertiary education reform, and deliver some pretty tough messages to the PNG government.
So the challenge is not to be driven by his domestic politics?
Well, from the point of view of someone who's, from the point of view of thinking that PNG is an important country in its own right, and that, if PNG isn't doing well, then ultimately Australia is also going to suffer. Yes, I think you have to look at it from that point of view as well.
Stephen Howes, we're very grateful for your time. Thank you for coming on Breaking Politics today.
All right. Thanks a lot.